The sun hung low over the Hidden Leaf village, casting a warm, golden light across its bustling streets. Among the throngs of villagers going about their evening routines, a small, spiky-haired boy moved quietly, his bright blue eyes wide with curiosity. Naruto Uzumaki, just 6 years old, was on another one of his unplanned adventures, wandering wherever his feet would take him. He had no particular destination in mind. He was just exploring, soaking in the sights and sounds of the village that always seemed to keep him at a distance. As he meandered through the alleys, his path took him farther from the familiar shops and crowded streets, leading him to quieter, less traveled parts of Konoha. The buildings here were different, taller, more imposing, with darkened windows and heavy doors. Naruto didn't recognize this area, but he didn't mind. If anything, the unfamiliarity only piqued his interest. He continued walking, his small feet padding softly against the stone pavement, until he found himself standing before a narrow, shadowed path tucked between two tall buildings. A sense of mystery hung over the area, and without a second thought, he ventured down the path, unaware that he was stepping into a restricted section of the village. The air grew cooler and quieter the farther he went, and the usual sounds of the village faded away, leaving only the faint rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of voices. Naruto's heart beat a little faster, but he was more excited than afraid. He kept going, his eyes darting around, taking in every detail. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something about this place felt different, almost secret. As he rounded a corner, he spotted a tall metal gate set into the side of a stone wall. It was slightly ajar, revealing a narrow stairway that led down into the ground. Naruto hesitated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, then slipped through the gate and started down the stairs, his steps echoing softly in the confined space. He had barely made it halfway down when a dark figure appeared out of nowhere, blocking his path. A masked shinobi, clad in black armor, stood before him, the silver mask glinting in the dim light. The ANBU operative had materialized silently, his presence sudden and imposing. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise, and he stumbled back, almost losing his balance. The ANBU agent remained still, his face hidden behind the mask, but Naruto could feel the weight of his gaze. For a moment, the two of them just stood there, the silence stretching between them. Naruto's heart thumped in his chest, but he didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what to do, so he just stared up at the masked figure, his blue eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and caution. The ANBU operative tilted his head slightly, as if assessing the situation. He hadn't expected to find a child here, especially not this child. He knew who Naruto was. Everyone in the village did, even if they didn't always speak of it openly. For a moment, he contemplated what to do. It would be easy enough to shoo the boy away, to tell him to go back to wherever he came from. But something made him hesitate. There was a quiet, unspoken defiance in Naruto's eyes, a determination that seemed out of place for someone his age. After a few seconds, the ANBU agent made his decision. Without a word, he reached down, lifting Naruto effortlessly off the ground. Naruto let out a small yelp of surprise, but didn't struggle. He was too curious, too intrigued by what was happening to resist. The ANBU operative held him securely, then vanished in a blur, disappearing from the stairway in a swift movement. They reappeared a moment later, in front of a heavy, reinforced door set into the side of a stone wall. Naruto blinked, trying to get his bearings, but before he could ask where they were, the door opened with a quiet hiss, revealing a dark, narrow corridor beyond. The ANBU operative carried Naruto inside, moving with a calm, deliberate pace, as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. As they walked down the corridor, Naruto glanced around, his eyes straining to see in the dim light. The walls were lined with strange, intricate seals, and the air felt cooler, heavier, as if they were deep underground. He could hear faint, muffled sounds coming from somewhere ahead, voices maybe, or the distant clinking of metal. It was hard to tell. Eventually, they reached another door, this one larger and more imposing than the last. The ANBU agent set Naruto down gently, then knocked twice. The door opened slowly, and Naruto found himself staring into a room he had never seen before. A dark, spacious chamber, lit by a single hanging lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. The ANBU operative set Naruto down gently in a dimly lit room, the heavy door closing behind them with a quiet, echoing thud. Naruto looked around, taking in his new surroundings. The room was sparse, with a single wooden table in the center, two chairs on either side, and walls lined with dark worn stone. The air felt cool, and there was a faint, lingering scent of metal, like old iron. Naruto had never been in a place like this before. It felt serious, almost intimidating. The masked shinobi stepped back, leaving Naruto alone at the table. For a moment, Naruto sat there, swinging his legs slightly, unsure of what to expect. He glanced around, his blue eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and caution. But there was nothing to distract him from the quiet, almost suffocating atmosphere. After what felt like an eternity, the door on the opposite side of the room creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside. Naruto's eyes snapped to the man, taking in his scarred face, his stern expression, and the way he carried himself. Calm, composed, like he was in complete control. The man's dark, observant eyes seemed to pierce right through Naruto, but there was no hostility in them, just an unreadable calmness. Naruto felt a shiver run down his spine, but he didn't look away. The man took a seat across from Naruto, folding his hands on the table, and for a moment, they just sat there in silence, sizing each other up. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low and steady. "Do you know who I am, Naruto?" Naruto hesitated, shaking his head. "No. But you know my name?" The man nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I do. My name is Ibiki Marino. I work for the village in a very specific line of work. You could say I deal with information, secrets, things that most people aren't supposed to know." Naruto's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Like a spy?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. Ibiki's smile widened just a bit, but he didn't correct Naruto. "Something like that," he said. "But not quite. I'm in charge of making sure that the village stays safe, that the secrets we hold don't fall into the wrong hands. And sometimes that means talking to people who don't want to talk." Naruto's brow furrowed, trying to make sense of what Ibiki was saying. "So, you make people tell you things?" "Yes," Ibiki said simply. "But not by force. At least, not usually. The key to getting people to talk isn't to make them afraid, but to make them understand that they don't have a choice. That's something you learn over time. You learn to read people, to see what they're hiding, even if they don't say it out loud." Naruto blinked, absorbing Ibiki's words. "And you do that for the village?" "Yes," Ibiki replied, his tone even. "To protect it. To make sure that everyone here can live safely, without fear of what's outside these walls. It's not an easy job, but it's necessary." Naruto's gaze softened a bit. "But why did you bring me here?" he asked. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just looking around." Ibiki studied Naruto for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I know you didn't do anything wrong, Naruto. You were just curious. But curiosity can lead you to dangerous places, especially if you don't understand what you're walking into." Naruto's cheeks flushed slightly, and he looked down at his hands. "I just wanted to see what was down there. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Ibiki leaned back in his chair, still watching Naruto closely. "I believe you. But let me ask you something, Naruto. Do you know why people in the village treat you the way they do?" Naruto's head snapped up, and for a moment, he felt a sharp pang in his chest. "I don't know," he said quietly. "They just don't like me. I don't know why." Ibiki nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "It's because they don't understand you. They're afraid of what they don't understand. Fear makes people act in ways that don't always make sense, even if they think they're doing the right thing." Naruto clenched his fists, his small frame tensing. "But it's not fair," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything." "No, you didn't," Ibiki agreed, his tone calm but firm. "But sometimes that doesn't matter. People will make assumptions. They'll judge you before they even know who you are. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can try to prove them wrong, or you can let their words define you." Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't look away. "So, what am I supposed to do?" Ibiki's smile was faint, almost sad. "That's up to you, Naruto. But I'll tell you this. Strength isn't just about how loud you are, or how many people you can beat in a fight. True strength is knowing who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. It's about being so sure of yourself that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to show off. You don't need to make people see you. You just are. Naruto's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he was lost in Ibiki's words. He had always felt like he had to shout, to make noise, just to be noticed. But this was different. It was a kind of strength he had never thought about before. A strength that didn't need to be loud. A strength that was calm, quiet, and unshakable. But how do you do that? Naruto asked, his voice small but earnest. How do you make people listen without yelling? Ibiki leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense but not harsh. People don't listen because you're loud, Naruto. They listen because you're confident, because you know what you're talking about, and you don't need to shout to make them understand. It's about control, control over yourself and over the situation. When you have that, people will listen, even if you don't say a word. Naruto was silent for a long moment, his mind racing. He thought about the way people ignored him, the way they looked at him with fear or pity, and he realized that maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to make them see him. Maybe he could be like Ibiki, strong, quiet, and confident without needing to shout. Ibiki watched the boy's expression, seeing the thoughts flickering behind those bright blue eyes. "Let me show you something," he said, standing up and walking to the door. He opened it, and immediately 2 ANBU agents stepped inside, their masks gleaming in the dim light. They stood at attention, waiting for Ibiki to speak, but he didn't say a word. He just glanced at them, and they nodded, understanding his silent command. Naruto's eyes widened. He had seen the ANBU before, but they had always been distant, untouchable. Now they were standing right in front of him, and they were listening to Ibiki, even though he hadn't said a word. "They listen because they respect me," Ibiki said, turning back to Naruto. "Not because I make them, not because I shout or demand it, but because they know I don't need to raise my voice. When you have that kind of presence, Naruto, you'll find that people will listen, whether they like it or not." Naruto felt a chill run down his spine, but it wasn't fear. It was admiration. For the first time, he saw a kind of strength he wanted to understand, a strength that didn't need to be loud or flashy. It was quiet, controlled, and powerful in a way he had never imagined. Ibiki dismissed the ANBU with a nod, and they left without a word, closing the door behind them. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Naruto?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. "True strength doesn't need to shout. It just is. And when you have that, people will notice. Not because you're loud, but because you're strong." Naruto nodded slowly, his eyes shining with newfound determination. "I think I understand," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I want to be strong like that." Ibiki's smile returned, softer this time. "Then start by believing in yourself. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just be who you are and let that speak for you. The rest will follow." Naruto left that room a little different than he had entered. He still didn't fully understand everything Ibiki had said, but he felt like he had glimpsed something important, something that would stay with him for a long time. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to shout, to make people see him. He just wanted to be strong, and he would find a way, step by silent step. 4 years later. The sun hung high over the training grounds of the Ninja Academy, casting sharp shadows across the packed dirt where students gathered, eager for the day's practical test. Among the crowd, one figure stood out, not because of any visible excitement or nervousness, but because of how calm and composed he appeared. Naruto Uzumaki, now 10 years old, was 2 years younger than most of his classmates, yet he stood among them, quietly observing everything with a thoughtful, steady gaze. "All right, everyone," Iruka announced, his voice carrying over the chatter. "Today, we'll be testing your taijutsu skills. You'll each face off against another student, and I'll be evaluating your technique, speed, and precision." He scanned the line of students, his eyes briefly landing on Naruto before moving on. "Naruto, you'll be going up against Kenta." A few murmurs rose from the group as Kenta Inuzuka, a boy known for his aggressive, fast-paced taijutsu style, stepped forward. He was tall for his age, with a wild mane of hair and a fierce grin that showed off his sharp canines. Being from the Inuzuka clan, he was no stranger to combat, and his peers often regarded him as one of the strongest in the class when it came to physical confrontations. Naruto remained unfazed as he walked to the center of the training grounds. He wasn't exactly nervous, but he felt a ripple of anticipation as he faced Kenta. The older boy's grin widened, clearly enjoying the prospect of going up against Naruto, who was smaller and younger. "Think you can keep up, Squirt?" Kenta taunted, cracking his knuckles. Naruto didn't respond with words. He simply nodded, his blue eyes calm and focused. The other students gathered closer, eager to watch. Some whispered to each other, betting on how quickly Kenta would finish the match. Few expected the younger boy to hold his own. Iruka raised his hand, signaling for them to start. "Begin!" Kenta was fast. He lunged forward, leading with a powerful punch aimed straight at Naruto's face. But Naruto had been watching him carefully, studying his movements even before they stepped into the ring. He sidestepped the attack with minimal effort, letting Kenta's fist pass by him harmlessly. Undeterred, Kenta swung again, this time with a swift kick aimed at Naruto's midsection. Naruto ducked, avoiding the kick, and retaliated with a quick jab to Kenta's side. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was precise, enough to make Kenta hesitate. Kenta's eyes narrowed, and he attacked more aggressively, trying to overwhelm Naruto with a barrage of strikes. But Naruto's approach was different. He didn't try to match Kenta's strength head-on. Instead, he danced around the older boy, slipping just out of reach of each attack, his movements smooth and efficient. He would let Kenta come close, but just when it seemed like he was cornered, he'd dodge with a subtle shift of his feet, never wasting a moment. The crowd began to murmur, realizing that this wasn't just luck. Naruto wasn't fighting to overpower Kenta. He was fighting to outsmart him. Frustration built in Kenta as his attacks continued to miss their mark. "Stop dodging and fight me," he growled, launching himself at Naruto with a renewed burst of speed. Naruto's eyes flicked up, catching the brief moment when Kenta overextended himself, and then he moved. He waited until Kenta was mid-step, his balance slightly off, and then spun, his body low to the ground. As Kenta's fist passed harmlessly by his head, Naruto's leg whipped up in a sharp, fluid motion, catching Kenta across the side of the head with a spinning heel kick. Kenta stumbled, his world tilting for a moment as he lost his footing. Naruto, however, wasn't done. Even as he was coming down from the kick, he adjusted his body, using the momentum to twist mid-air and aim a final push off Kenta's shoulder, landing softly a few feet away. Kenta hit the ground with a thud, stunned and disoriented. For a moment, there was complete silence. The other students were wide-eyed, caught off guard by how the match had ended. Kenta, who was known for his aggression and strength, had been bested by the quiet younger boy who didn't rely on brute force but precision and timing. Iruka stepped forward, nodding to himself. "Match over. Naruto wins." He glanced briefly at Naruto, impressed by the younger boy's taijutsu technique. The spinning heel kick had been particularly well executed, clean, controlled, and effective. It wasn't flashy, but it showed a level of precision that was rare for someone Naruto's age. Naruto simply dusted off his hands, not reacting much to the announcement. As he turned to walk back to his spot in line, a classmate named Hiro, one of the few who often spoke to him, gave a low whistle. "That was pretty cool, Naruto. Didn't think you'd take Kenta down like that." Naruto gave a slight nod, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "He's strong, but he's predictable," he said quietly. "It was just a matter of timing." Kenta, still rubbing the side of his head, managed to sit up, his earlier bravado dimmed, but not entirely gone. He glanced at Naruto, not with anger, but with a newfound respect. "Next time, I'll beat you," he muttered, a grin creeping back onto his face. Naruto shrugged, not looking back. "Maybe." Iruka watched the interaction, noting how Naruto's taijutsu was efficient and precise, his movements deliberate. There was no excess, no wasted effort. Just a quiet, calculated approach to every strike. As the class continued, he couldn't help but think that, despite being the youngest, Naruto had shown an impressive amount of skill and control. As the students paired off for their own matches, Iruka's gaze lingered on Naruto for a moment longer, wondering just how far the quiet, young prodigy would go. As the class dispersed, Naruto quietly gathered his things, tuning out the buzz of excited chatter around him. Some of his classmates congratulated Kenta for putting up a good fight, while others glanced curiously at Naruto, still trying to figure out how he managed to win without flashy moves or overwhelming power. But Naruto didn't pay much attention. He didn't care for the attention or the praise. He was already thinking ahead, his mind working through the details of the match. He had won, but there was still so much he needed to refine. Kenta was fast and strong, and while Naruto's timing and precision had carried him to victory, he knew that there were other opponents who wouldn't fall for the same tactics. He needed to be sharper, quicker, and more prepared. While others were making plans to head home or hang out with friends, Naruto quietly slipped out of the training grounds, his movements smooth and deliberate. He had a routine, a rhythm, and there was something comforting about sticking to it. With a final glance at the academy building, he turned and began walking toward the center of the village, his footsteps light but purposeful. The village library was quiet when he arrived, a peaceful contrast to the noise of the academy. Naruto had discovered it a few years ago, during one of his many explorations around the village. At first, he hadn't thought much of it, but as he started reading more about the basics of ninjutsu and strategies, he found himself returning there more often, seeking answers and new ideas. It had become his sanctuary, a place where he could think without interruptions, a place where he could learn without judgment. Pushing open the doors, he made his way to a familiar section, his eyes scanning the shelves filled with scrolls and books. The academy had already taught him the basics of the transformation jutsu and substitution jutsu, but there was something about those techniques that intrigued him. He had a feeling there was more to them than just the simple tricks they were used for in class. There had to be a way to turn those basic jutsu into something more versatile, something that could give him an edge. He reached up, pulling down a book titled Advanced Applications of Basic Jutsu. It was an old, dusty volume, one that most students probably overlooked in favor of more exciting material. But Naruto wasn't looking for excitement. He was looking for answers. He flipped through the pages, his eyes sharp as they scanned the words, absorbing everything he could. The library was nearly empty, the soft glow of lanterns casting shadows across the wooden floor. Naruto found a quiet corner near the back, where the light was dim and the air was cool. He sat down, leaning against the wall with the book open in his lap. As he read, his mind wandered back to the fight with Kenta. He had been able to win because he stayed calm and used his opponent's aggression against him. But what if there was a way to create even more openings, to manipulate his opponent's perception without them realizing it? The transformation. Jutsu could be used for more than just disguises, and the substitution jutsu could be more than just a simple escape. Make them see what they want to see, and then strike when they're distracted, he thought, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the book. It was a concept he had seen once, in a passing reference to genjutsu, but it wasn't quite the same. This was about controlling the flow of a fight, about forcing his opponent to react in a way that benefited him. As Naruto continued reading, he found himself immersed in ideas, possibilities branching out in his mind like a complex web. He was already thinking of how he could use these jutsu in new ways, how he could surprise his opponents and turn their strengths against them. It was like solving a puzzle, each piece fitting together slowly but surely. And with every idea, he felt a quiet thrill, a sense of purpose that drove him to keep pushing forward. The soft rustle of a turning page broke the silence, and Naruto glanced up, briefly catching sight of a few other students who had wandered in, chattering quietly as they searched for their own books. He recognized some of them. They were older than him, part of the same class he had just faced Kenta in. They didn't notice him, and he was fine with that. In the quiet corner of the library, Naruto was invisible, and he liked it that way. He didn't need to draw attention to himself, didn't need to boast about his victories or prove anything to anyone. He would let them underestimate him, let them think he was just a quiet kid who happened to get lucky. It was better that way. And when the time came, when he was ready, they would see what he was truly capable of. Naruto's eyes flicked back to the book, and he began to read again, his focus sharpening as new ideas formed in his mind. He was still young, still learning, but that was okay. He had time. He would keep studying, keep practicing, and he would find a way to make those basic jutsu into something entirely new. The sun was setting by the time he finally closed the book, the library dimming as the last rays of light filtered through the windows. Naruto stood, stretching his arms before carefully placing the book back on the shelf. There was still so much to learn, but he wasn't in a rush. He would take it one step at a time, just like he had been doing all along. As he walked out of the library, the cool evening air brushed against his face, and for a moment, he paused, looking up at the sky. The stars were beginning to appear, tiny specks of light against the darkening blue. Naruto allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He was still a long way from being the strongest ninja, but he was getting there, step by step. And he didn't need anyone else to see that progress. He would let his actions speak for themselves, let his silence be his strength. The next day would bring new challenges, new opportunities to learn, and Naruto would be ready. With a quiet determination, he turned and headed back to his apartment, the image of the spinning heel kick still fresh in his mind. He had surprised Kenta today, but that was just the beginning. There was so much more he could do, so much more he was determined to achieve, and he would do it his way, quietly, without a word. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. See you in the next one.